Catherine Sloan was the woman everyone talked about, at least those who had ever heard her voice. Born and raised in a small town in Oregon, she had moved to Edinburgh to pursue her dream of becoming a doctor. However, fate had other plans. Her love for music led her to the stage of the Silver Melody Club, where her performances instantly captivated audiences. Her pure, emotional voice and her ability to deliver every lyric straight to the listener's heart made her a local sensation. Catherine's days started with lectures on anatomy and pathophysiology and ended on the stage. Her daily routine was grueling: morning classes, evening performances, and short bursts of sleep in between. Yet despite the constant exhaustion, she persevered, knowing she was pursuing what she loved. Her friends, mostly fellow students and musicians, often marveled at how she always managed to smile, radiate joy, and inspire others with her energy. The Silver Melody Club became her second home. She performed there every Friday, and the audience never grew tired of applauding her. Her performances drew in not only regular patrons, but also those outside the club's usual crowd. It was on one of these evenings that she first encountered Noel Brown. Noel was not the type to stand out. His composed demeanor and calm gaze revealed a man who understood his worth. At first glance, he seemed like an ordinary listener who had stumbled into the club by chance. In reality, he was a prominent figure in the media world, the owner of one of the largest television networks in the United States. His marriage to Hannah, who was a co-owner of the business, seemed perfect to the public eye, but was, in truth, strained and almost purely formal. When Noel heard Catherine sing, something in him stirred. Her voice reminded him of what he had long forgotten amidst the chaos of building his career and business empire: authenticity, sincerity, and a yearning for something greater. He approached her after her performance, congratulated her, and from that moment their story began, a story that would change both of their lives. Noel started attending all her performances, bringing her flowers and occasionally leaving anonymous notes of encouragement. At first, Catherine saw this as harmless admiration. She didn't give it much thought until one day he invited her to a charity event for children organized by his company. The evening took place in a lavish hall filled with dozens of guests, but Noel spent the entire time by Catherine's side. Their conversation effortlessly transitioned from music to life, and eventually to more personal matters. He confided in her about his struggles, about how he felt lonely even in his vast estate. In turn, Catherine shared her fears, whether she would have the strength to continue her studies and whether she could ever balance medicine and music. That evening marked the beginning of their relationship. For Catherine, Noel became an inspiration. He told her she could achieve anything, that her talent and hard work would lead her to success. But at the same time, her heart began to tear in two. She knew this romance wasn't only unfair to Hannah, but also had the potential to ruin her own life. Yet her feelings for Noel were so strong that she couldn't walk away. Her friend Lily, who also served as Catherine's manager, was the first to notice the change. Lily had known Catherine since school and had always supported her. But now she began to observe her friend becoming more contemplative and, at times, withdrawn. She tried to understand what was happening, but Catherine would brush it off, insisting everything was fine. Despite her inner turmoil, Catherine continued her journey. She performed, studied, and lived a life no one around her fully understood. But she had no idea that this path to the summit would bring with it devastating consequences. With each passing day, Catherine's behavior began to change. Her once boundless energy gradually started to fade. She increasingly looked tired, distant, and even her performances at the Silver Melody Club no longer radiated the magnetic brilliance that had so enchanted her audience. Lily, who worked as her manager, noticed these changes, but Catherine refused to discuss what was bothering her. She avoided questions about her personal life and often locked herself in her room, as though trying to hide from the world. Meanwhile, Noel promised her everything she wanted to hear. He assured her that he would soon leave his wife, that they could start a new life together. But his words remained just words. Over time, his promises became vaguer, and instead of concrete plans, excuses started to surface. Just a little more time, he repeated every time Catherine asked for clarity about their future together. This internal conflict gradually consumed her. On one hand, she felt she loved Noel. that their connection was something special and profound. On the other hand, she knew she was living in the shadows, and this story could ruin her life at any moment. Her creative energy started to fade along with her faith in Noel's promises. At the same time, Hannah Brown, Noel's wife, began to suspect that something was amiss in their marriage. Her husband had grown distant, and his late returns home had become routine. Hannah wasn't the kind of woman to let things slide, especially when her business and reputation were at stake. She knew that any scandal involving her husband would inevitably affect her as well, given their joint control over their media empire. Hannah hired a private investigator to uncover what her husband was doing in his free time. A few weeks into the investigation, the detective provided her with several photographs taken during Catherine's performances, in which Noel could be seen in the audience. Other photos showed the pair dining at restaurants, walking in parks. The evidence was enough to confirm her suspicions. Around the same time, Lily stumbled upon a draft of an email on Catherine's laptop. Its content made her heart sink. "I can't stay silent anymore. The world deserves to know the truth." Alarmed, Lily decided to talk to her friend, but Catherine only brushed her off, refusing to explain the meaning of the letter. Lily could sense that Catherine was on the verge of something serious, but she didn't know how to help. One evening, Noel began receiving anonymous threats. The first letter contained just a few words. "I know what you're doing." At first, he ignored it, assuming someone was merely trying to scare him. But as similar messages continued to arrive regularly, he began to feel cornered. His once unshakable confidence started to crumble. Against this backdrop, Catherine and Noel's relationship grew increasingly strained. She wanted clarity. Either they were together or they were not. He, on the other hand, evaded giving her straight answers, constantly coming up with new excuses. Every time they met, their conversations began calmly but inevitably ended in arguments. At a certain point, Lily noticed that Catherine began doing things she had never done before, postponing her performances, skipping important rehearsals. She appeared exhausted. She was no longer the cheerful, vibrant woman everyone knew. One evening, after one of Catherine's performances, Lily accidentally overheard part of a conversation between her and Noel. From what she heard, it became clear that their relationship had long ceased to be a romantic love story. Catherine was trapped. Her voice cracked as she said she couldn't go on living this way. But Noel simply asked her to endure just a little longer, saying he was on the verge of fixing everything. The tension reached its peak. The anonymous threats to Noel continued. Hannah kept gathering evidence, and Lily grew increasingly worried about her friend. Catherine lived on the edge of emotional exhaustion, struggling to see where this chaos would lead. But what terrified her most was the thought, was there any chance this could have a happy ending? Hannah remained outwardly calm, but inside she was consumed by rage. The evidence of Noel and Catherine's relationship lay before her. Dozens of photos, screenshots of messages, names of restaurants where they had spent their evenings. The private investigator had done his job impeccably. Hannah knew she couldn't allow this information to go public. Her image, her business, her influence, everything depended on her ability to keep the situation under control. She spent days pondering her next move. A public scandal was out of the question. It would destroy not only Noel, but herself as well. Yet silence wasn't an option either. Hannah decided to act in secret, keeping control and giving Noel no opportunity to escape accountability. Noel felt as though he was caught between a rock and a hard place. He knew Hannah suspected him, but he couldn't bring himself to confess outright. He also realized that Catherine no longer believed his promises, which only complicated matters further. Every time they met, he could sense her cold, questioning gaze and the tension in her voice. Her patience was running out. Catherine, too, felt increasingly lost. Her inner world had become a whirlwind of chaos. She sensed that her life was spiraling out of control. Her medical studies, once a source of pride and purpose, had turned into a burden, and music, her lifelong sanctuary, had lost its power to soothe her. She felt as if everyone around her expected more from her than she could give. Lily, who remained by her side, was deeply concerned about her friend's state. One evening, as they sat in Catherine's apartment, Lily decided to have an honest conversation. "Kat, I can see something's wrong with you. You're changing. Whatever's happening, you can trust me." Lily said, looking her friend directly in the eyes. Catherine hesitated for a moment, but instead of answering, she simply shrugged silently. She couldn't bring herself to confess everything, not even to Lily. She felt that as soon as the truth came out, she would lose everything: her career, her friends, and even herself. One evening, after a concert at the club, Catherine overheard a conversation between two patrons. One of them whispered, "Did you hear? They say she's seeing someone powerful. But it's just rumors, right?" Catherine's heart began to race. Although her name wasn't mentioned explicitly, those words sounded like a warning. Shortly after, Noel received another anonymous letter. This one read, "Man, it's time to make a decision. Your secret won't stay hidden for long." He was confused and alarmed. Hannah appeared to know nothing about the letter, but her behavior made him uneasy. She no longer pretended to be kind or caring. Instead, she openly ignored his attempts to explain himself, which only heightened his inner panic. Noel realized that his life was rapidly approaching a breaking point. He tried to discuss it with Catherine, but each of their conversations ended in an argument. She no longer wanted to wait. Her demand was clear. Either he left his wife, or she would reveal the truth. Meanwhile, Lily found yet another clue about what was going on. On one of Catherine's laptops, she noticed a list of documents with strange titles. Farewell Notes, The Last Chance Song, I Still Love Him. When Lily confronted Catherine about it, she received only a curt response. "They're just song lyrics. Stop overthinking." But Lily could sense there was more behind those words. The tension grew, and Catherine increasingly felt like someone was watching her. One day she noticed a stranger near the entrance to the club. Another time, she felt as though someone had been in her apartment while she was out. Her heart was gripped with fear, and her mind was filled with questions. Was this all her imagination? Or was the danger real? This invisible threat loomed over everyone involved in this drama. Hannah was acting carefully, Noel was losing his composure, and Catherine lived in a constant state of anxiety. But this was just the beginning. After weeks of mounting tension, Catherine Sloane's life had completely lost its usual rhythm. What was once a balanced routine of studying and music now felt like an endless chain of anxiety and dread. Catherine increasingly felt surrounded by invisible threats. Strangers near the club, uncertainty about the safety of her own home, and the unsettling feeling of being watched created an atmosphere of constant psychological pressure. One evening, after leaving a performance, Catherine noticed a man standing near the club's entrance. He didn't approach her, but his presence was unnerving. The next day, she saw the same figure near her apartment building. While she tried to convince herself it was just a coincidence, her suspicions grew stronger. She even noticed that a few items in her apartment were out of place, as if someone had touched them while she was away. At the same time, Lily, her manager and closest friend, was uncovering more pieces of the puzzle. She learned from acquaintances that Hannah Brown, Noel's wife, had hired a private investigator. This confirmed that Hannah not only knew about her husband's affair, but was actively taking steps to address it. Lily realized the conflict would soon come to a head, but Catherine continued to push her away, refusing any offers of help. During this period, Hannah stepped out of the shadows. Armed with all the evidence she needed, she made her next move. Her ultimatum to Noel was clear. If he didn't end his relationship with Catherine immediately, she wouldn't just destroy his reputation. She'd take away his business as well. For Hannah, this was not simply about marital fidelity. It was about control and survival. She understood that any scandal could jeopardize their joint empire, and she was determined not to let that happen. Noel, meanwhile, felt increasingly pressured. His relationship with Catherine, which once felt like an escape from his problems, had now become a constant source of stress. He could no longer ignore Hannah's demands, but he didn't want to lose Catherine either. This inner struggle made him cold and distant in his interactions with her. He began avoiding her, delaying the moment when he would have to make a final decision. Catherine was beginning to realize that her relationship with Noel was changing. Their meetings became shorter, their conversations more superficial. She pressed him for clear answers about their future, but all she got in return were vague promises. This left her feeling even more lost. She no longer believed their relationship had a real chance of continuing. The tension in Catherine's life reached a new peak when Lily accidentally discovered a list of files on Catherine's laptop. Among them were documents with titles like Goodbye Words and My Last Performance. This deeply worried Lily, but when she tried to confront Catherine, her friend avoided the conversation, dismissing the documents as lyrics for new songs. Yet her tone and demeanor betrayed emotional instability. The situation escalated further when Noel received another anonymous letter with a chilling warning. The world will know the truth if you don't end this affair. Although he didn't know who was behind the threats, they only heightened his anxiety. He understood he could no longer balance between two lives. Catherine felt like her life was spiraling out of control. Her fears deepened, and her trust in people began to erode. She couldn't tell who genuinely cared about her and who might be taking advantage of her vulnerability. Her inner world was falling apart, and it showed in her appearance and behavior. The approaching crisis was inevitable. Hannah continued to apply pressure on Noel. Catherine teetered on the brink of a nervous breakdown, and Lily did everything in her power to support her friend, though her own strength was running out. The conflict, once hidden, began to surface, and no one could predict the consequences that were about to unfold. The day before the tragedy began like any other for Catherine Sloan. She woke up early, drank her usual cup of black coffee, and prepared for another performance at the Silver Melody Club. But this time, her thoughts were not focused on rehearsals or music. They were consumed by the meeting Noel had scheduled for the following evening. It was meant to be the decisive conversation about their future. Catherine had already prepared a draft of a post she planned to share on social media, revealing her story if Noel failed to make the decision she was waiting for. She weighed the pros and cons, fully aware that such a step could ruin not only her reputation, but also her career. Yet she couldn't stay silent any longer. A note she left in her journal reflected her state of mind. Tomorrow, everything will change, no matter the cost. Meanwhile, Lily began receiving troubling signs of her own. That morning, an anonymous note was delivered to her, reading, "Stay away if you want to stay alive." The handwriting was unfamiliar, and the letter appeared hastily written. Lily immediately suspected it had something to do with the situation between Catherine and Noel. She tried calling Catherine repeatedly, but her calls went unanswered. Later that evening, Lily visited Catherine's apartment, trying to convince her to leave the city, at least for a few days. She suggested they go to a mutual friend's place out of town, far from the stress and tension. But Catherine flatly refused. She had made up her mind to stay and confront her problems head-on. For her, it had become a matter of pride and self-determination. That same evening, Catherine performed at the Silver Melody Club. On stage, she tried to act as she always did, but her eyes betrayed her inner turmoil. Regular patrons of the club noticed she seemed exhausted. Her performance was technically flawless, but it lacked the emotional depth that once mesmerized her audience. It was a moment when the crowd realized that Catherine was going through something profoundly difficult. After her performance, she left the club earlier than usual. Surveillance cameras captured her getting into a taxi and heading home. Neighbors later recalled seeing Catherine return to her apartment around 11 that night. She didn't draw attention to herself and appeared calm, albeit somewhat preoccupied. Minutes after Catherine entered her apartment, the building's security cameras recorded a man in a dark coat entering the premises. His face was obscured by a hood, and he moved as if deliberately trying to avoid being noticed. It remains unclear whether this man was Noel or someone else, but this detail would later become a crucial element of the investigation. Inside her apartment, Catherine spent several hours writing notes and reviewing old recordings. Her journal, later found by the police, contained an entry made that night. "I've done everything I could. Tomorrow I'll find out if it was all for nothing." Her words revealed a mixture of determination and despair. At the same time, Noel was in a state of panic. His wife, Hannah, had backed him into a corner, demanding he immediately end his relationship with Catherine. He hesitated, searching for a compromise, but no option seemed right. Every decision carried the potential for catastrophic consequences. Meanwhile, Hannah continued her calculated moves. She sent a message, later identified by the police as a pivotal factor in the unfolding events. In it, she made it clear that she wouldn't allow their business or reputation to suffer because of Noel's affair. That night would be the last calm moment for everyone involved. The next day would bring events that would forever alter the lives of Catherine, Lily, Noel, and Hannah. For now, everything remained on the verge of an invisible but growing storm. The morning after the tense night began with an oppressive silence. Lily, who hadn't been able to sleep due to her growing anxiety, kept trying to call Catherine, but all her calls went unanswered. This was unusual. No matter how difficult things got, Catherine always found time to at least send a short reply. Lily's worry deepened with every passing hour until she finally decided to go to Catherine's apartment to check on her. When she arrived at Catherine's building, she noticed that the windows of her apartment were closed and no lights were on inside. She rang the doorbell several times, but no one answered. Lily's growing concern turned into panic. She approached the building's concierge, explaining the situation. The concierge, who recognized Lily as a frequent visitor, agreed to help her gain access to the apartment. When they entered the apartment, the silence was almost suffocating. Everything seemed to be in its place, but there was an unsettling sense of emptiness in the air. In the bedroom, they found Catherine. She was lying motionless on the bed, and on the nightstand beside her was a note. It contained only a few words. "I just wanted the truth." The sight left Lily in shock. She immediately called the police, and the investigation began almost immediately. Detective James Hale, known for his meticulous attention to detail in even the most complex cases, arrived on the scene to lead the investigation. The first steps of the police were focused on gathering evidence. There were no obvious signs of a struggle in the apartment, but investigators noticed a few peculiar details. Surveillance footage from the building revealed that a man in a dark coat had entered the building that night. His face was obscured, making identification difficult, but the timing of his arrival coincided with Catherine's return home. On Catherine's desk, police found a draft of a letter addressed to Hannah Brown. In it, Catherine wrote about her intent to reveal the truth about her relationship with Noel. She explained that she could no longer stay silent and asked Hannah to meet with her personally to find a resolution. This letter became a key piece of evidence, revealing the intense psychological pressure Catherine was under. Noel Brown was brought in for questioning. The surveillance footage confirmed his presence in the building that night, but his lawyers insisted that he had left Catherine's apartment long before the tragedy occurred. Noel admitted that he had visited Catherine that evening to convince her not to expose their affair, but he claimed their conversation had been brief, and he denied any involvement in her death. He described her decision as a tragedy he could never have anticipated. Hannah Brown was also questioned. She maintained a composed exterior, but Detective Hale noted several inconsistencies in her statements. She denied any direct contact with Catherine and claimed she was unaware of her plans to go public with the affair. However, evidence gathered by investigators suggested otherwise. The investigation also focused on the anonymous threats that both Catherine and Noel had received. While the sender could not be immediately identified, the detectives suspected a connection to Hannah's actions. Handwriting analysis and forensic examination of the letters revealed that they had been written by the same person. Further analysis indicated that some of the letters had been composed on a computer located in the office shared by Hannah and Noel. During the trial, Noel admitted that he had visited Catherine that night to dissuade her from making her relationship with him public. He insisted that their encounter had been a verbal argument and that he had left shortly afterward. However, his inability to provide a clear timeline of events raised doubts among the jury. Hannah, for her part, claimed her only intention was to protect her family and business. She denied any involvement in the anonymous threats or psychological harassment. The breakthrough came during a financial investigation. It was discovered that Noel and Hannah had spent significant sums on private investigators and legal consultations months before Catherine's death. This suggested they had been preparing for a confrontation with her, which painted a picture of premeditated actions designed to silence her. The court ultimately found Noel Brown guilty of involuntary manslaughter. Though he had not directly caused Catherine's death, his actions, his manipulation, empty promises, and refusal to take responsibility had created the conditions that led to her tragic end. His choices were motivated by fear of losing his reputation, power, and business. But in the end, it was these fears that led to his downfall. Hannah Brown was convicted of psychological harassment and manipulation. The evidence showed that her actions had directly contributed to Catherine's overwhelming sense of fear and hopelessness. The evidence showed that her actions, especially the anonymous letters and her use of intimidation tactics, had directly contributed to Catherine's feelings of hopelessness and fear. Though she denied any wrongdoing, the weight of the evidence made her culpability undeniable. Detective James Hale reflected on the case as one of the most challenging of his career. It was a stark reminder of how small, seemingly inconsequential actions could snowball into catastrophic consequences. Hale emphasized that the case demonstrated the importance of recognizing psychological factors in criminal investigations, as they often held the key to understanding the full story. For Lily, the loss of Catherine was a deeply personal tragedy. Determined to ensure that her friend's story would not be forgotten, she became an advocate for raising awareness about psychological abuse and emotional manipulation. She collaborated with various organizations to provide resources and support for individuals in similar situations, transforming Catherine's tragedy into a platform for meaningful change. Catherine's death became a turning point in public discussions about toxic relationships and the long-term impact of emotional abuse. Her story revealed the devastating consequences of manipulation and the dangers of leaving such issues unaddressed. The tragedy also highlighted the need for stronger support systems for those facing emotional and psychological crises. While justice was served in the courtroom, the story left a lasting impact on everyone involved. For Detective Hale, it was a case that underscored the complexities of human relationships and the often hidden factors that could drive people to the breaking point. For Lily, it was a call to action, a reason to ensure that Catherine's voice, silenced in life, would continue to resonate in a way that inspired hope and change. Catherine Sloan's death became not just a tragic event, but a symbol of the destructive power of deception, psychological pressure, and human fears. Her story sparked widespread discussion, raising questions about accountability, the consequences of our choices, and the cost of truth. After the trial concluded, public opinion was divided. Some believed the tragedy could have been prevented, while others saw it as the inevitable conclusion of events that had spiraled out of control. The court's verdict brought the case to a formal close. Noel Brown was sentenced to several years in prison for involuntary manslaughter. While he had not directly caused Catherine's death, the court determined that his manipulation and refusal to take responsibility for the situation created the conditions that led to the tragedy. His actions had been driven by fear of losing his reputation, power, and the business empire he had spent years building. But ultimately, it was this very fear that led to his downfall. Hannah Brown was also convicted for her role in the events. Her psychological harassment and manipulative tactics, aimed not only at Noel but at Catherine as well, were central to the court's decision. The evidence showed that her actions, including the use of private investigators and possibly the anonymous letters, had created an atmosphere of constant fear that pushed Catherine to her breaking point. With her freedom and reputation ruined, and the business empire she had worked to protect now out of her control, Hannah was left with nothing but the consequences of her own choices. Lily, Catherine's closest friend and manager, became the force behind transforming this tragedy into something meaningful. She founded the Catherine Sloan Foundation, an organization dedicated to helping women in difficult personal situations and those experiencing psychological abuse. The foundation gained significant attention and support, and within a year of its establishment, it had helped hundreds of women find safety, shelter, and a chance at a new beginning. Catherine's death drew public attention to issues that had often been ignored or left in the shadows. It ignited conversations about the dangers of toxic relationships, emotional manipulation, and the lack of support for those facing such challenges. Her story became a catalyst for new initiatives aimed at raising awareness of psychological abuse and its devastating effects. The Silver Melody Club, where Catherine had performed, became a place of remembrance. A small memorial was set up in her honor, serving as a reminder of the talented singer who had been on the rise but never got the chance to fully realize her potential. Her songs, preserved in recordings, took on new meaning for her fans. They no longer heard just music, but also a reflection of her struggles and resilience. Catherine's story also served as a cautionary tale for others. It showed how deceit, manipulation, and a lack of honesty in relationships could have devastating consequences, not just for those directly involved, but for everyone around them. It also raised questions about society's responsibility to recognize and address early warning signs of emotional distress. Despite the immense loss, Lily continued her mission to keep Catherine's memory alive. Through the foundation and her advocacy work, she ensured that Catherine's story would not be forgotten. What could have been just another heartbreaking tale became a source of hope and change, helping countless others avoid the same fate. Ultimately, Catherine's story was not only about her death, but also about the lessons her life left behind. It was a testament to the power of truth, which, even through pain and loss, can inspire healing and transformation. It reminded everyone of the importance of supporting those who struggle in silence, and it underscored the need to confront fears, lies, and manipulation with honesty and courage.